Alright, so welcome back everybody. So for this video, I'll be showing you guys how to play Point City by Flatout Games and AEG. So, let me get started showing you guys how to play this game. Now, it is a little different from Point Salad. Different enough to be its own unique game. Although there will be some similarities in this game to Point Salad, but only some. Now, this is a card drafting and set collection and engine building game. And one thing Point Salad was not an engine building game. So that's one of the big differences between this game and that game. On your turn, you will draft two cards. The cards you draft have to be next to each other, so I couldn't take this one and this one because they're not next to each other. So whatever cards I take have to be next to each other. So let's say I do that. Let's say I take two cards on my turn. What cards should I take? Well, one thing you should know is everybody starts with an ingenuity card. This is considered a wild resource, okay? And it's a one-time use as well. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using resources to pay for buildings, basically, in order to put a building into our tableau, into our town, if you will, into our city. And so we definitely need resources to start off with. And so this is a basic setup of how you would start the game off. You will score points based on certain buildings. Certain building cards will give you victory points, okay? But not every building gives you victory points. But one of the main ways you will score points in this game is something that would be considered very similar to, obviously, Point Salad. So this is a civic token. And if you ever put a building into your town that you were able to build that has this icon on top of the card, that's the civic icon. That means you'll be able to choose one of the civic tokens that are available, and you'll get to put it into your town. And then this tells you you'll score 3 points for each pairing of ecology and community that you have on your cards. What does that mean? Well, you're not going to be using your resources here for these civic tokens. Like, for instance, in Point Salad, you would collect various, obviously, resources, should I say, vegetables, and you would score points based on all the vegetables you have. But you're only going to be scoring points on your buildings. So any of these resources that you still have in your hand won't be worth any points at the end of the game. It's going to be the buildings that score you points. So for instance, here we have a golf course, and you'll notice that it has this as a cost. So you have to have these resources to pay for it, or at least an ingenuity to pay for at least one that you might not have enough of. You could use an ingenuity wild resource to pay for, like, maybe industry or maybe one of the energy. But still, you're going to need resources to pay for this card. But then you'll notice this card here gives you a permanent resource. When you build a building into your city, some of these will give you permanent resources, okay? And so that's what this civic token means. So each of your cards that have permanent resources of this exact type, as in ecology and community, score you 3 points. So I'd have to have another card that has this as a permanent resource. Like, for instance, I'd have to have an apartment and a golf course, basically, in combination to score 3 points. So that means I'm going to need to be looking for buildings that will have permanent resources of this kind and this kind in order to score as many points as I can with this particular civic token. But there are lots of different civic tokens, and so, like, for instance, you could take this civic token here, which would score you 6 points if you have one of every permanent resource. So one of the 5, all 5, one of each. So if you were able to get 2 of all 5, that would be 12 points at the end of the game. So that's one of the main ways you will score victory points, is based on what civic tokens you chose and what permanent resources you have. Of course, there are some civic tokens, like this civic token only gives you 5 points. So you don't have to have anything special This just gives you 5 points. We've got a civic token over here that will score you 2 points for every building that has this civic icon on it. So that could be useful if you have a lot of those buildings. So yeah, I mean, there's various ways you could score points based on what civic tokens you have. And of course, some of these buildings will give you victory points when you build them. But you know, not all of them do. This one doesn't, for instance. That one's only got 1 on it, 1 on it, 1 on it. This one doesn't have points on it. Not neither does that one. So there's a lot of cards here towards the end of the game that still have a lot of victory points. But as you go further down, or should I say, as you'll start with these cards on top, and you'll notice a lot of them, some of them, but not all of them, will also give you victory points. And if they do, they don't give you very many, potentially, right? So, yeah. But, like I said, this is an engine building game, so you're wanting to get cards for this, so that way you can build more buildings in your town. Now, on your turn, so let's talk about the flow of the game. Now that we explained how the victory points are going to work at the end of the game, and just like in Point Salad, almost like in Point Salad, so in Point City, when this deck is completely gone, meaning you can no longer refill this market of cards here, then the game is over, okay? So it's not when all of these cards are gone, it's when you can no longer refill, obviously, the market, okay? So that's how the game will end. So the flow of the game is, like I said, you take 2 cards of your choice, and then it could be 2 buildings, or it could be 2 resources, but then at the end of your turn, you will replace the resources with buildings. So for instance, let's say I was to take maybe this energy card here and this ecology card here. Okay, so after I was to take these 2 resources into my hand, okay, I then have to replace them, replenish from the top left to the bottom right, okay, first. But I will always replace resources with buildings. And so this is how we get the buildings out. So now we have some buildings here. And you'll notice this one has an industry permanent resource on it for the rest of the game. This one does not, but it gives you 4 points versus this one just giving you 1 point. Okay? Now, I'm also going to talk about the solo. So the game would play normally in a multiplayer, but the solo variant, if you're playing against a solo AI opponent, they will take their turn as follows. You'll notice we have 2 of these tokens with Point City on them. And so what's going to happen is the AI opponent is always going to take the card that intersects between the 2 tokens. So they're all pointing to this one. And then you'll always take the bottom one below it. So the AI will always take that equation. So for instance, for the first round, the AI is going to take these 2 cards. Now the thing about the AI, it will never score points on resource cards. So you don't mind if the AI takes these 2 ecology cards, because you know the AI is not scoring any points for this turn, which is nice. That means not every turn they're going to be taking cards that will give them points, okay? But yeah, they're going to take that, obviously. And then, once again, you still have to refill what they took with, obviously, the corresponding card. So, since they took 2 resources, you put 2 buildings down in its place. Then you're going to move these tokens. This one's going to go here, and then this one's going to go there, okay? That's how that's going to work. Now, here's the thing with the AI. The way the AI is going to score points at the end of the game is if they take a building card that has a permanent resource on it, they're going to get a victory point for that. So if they were to take this card in a future turn, they would score just 1 point for this card. If they take a card that has points on it as well as a resource, they would get 3 points for this card, because they'd get 2 for this and they'd still get the 1 for this, which is nice. So they're going to score points like that. Also, if they ever take a card that has a civic icon on it, a civic icon, so like if they ever take this card, if they were ever to take something like this with this icon on it, then they're going to take the leftmost civic token. So they're going to take this one here, and it becomes theirs. That's what would happen. And they don't score the same way that we would with civic tokens. If you're playing the easy mode, they would score 3 points for their civic token, regardless of what the number was on the civic token. If you were playing normal mode against them, they would get 5 points for every civic token they took, and hard is obviously even harder, which would mean they get even more points with hard. But yeah, that's how that would work. So they've taken their turn, they've taken their cards, which don't do anything for them. You'll notice we have 2 tokens here. This will get interesting as you go. You might want to use these to remind you what resource, or if it was a building that was taken, so you know exactly what to place the next time when your turn is done and you need to refill the market. So you might want to keep these handy, okay? Okay, so then it's back to me. It's my turn. I have ecology, I have energy, and I have ingenuity. So is there any buildings here I can build? Well, I can. I don't really have enough for this yet. I could get this birdhouse here, but you'll notice it also requires economy, and I don't have economy, but I could potentially use my ingenuity as my economy card to build that birdhouse plus this energy card. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to take this economy card and the birdhouse, and then we're going to use the economy card that we just took to pay for the birdhouse. Now remember, this was a resource. So we're going to put the resource token here to remind us that that was a resource. And this was the birdhouse. So we're going to put this building token here to remind us that that was the building. It's very easy to get ahead and forget where you had, which cards were where. So it's always good to just immediately replace them when you take them. So yes, we can now pay for this birdhouse and play it into our city. So it costs an energy and an economy resource. So we'll take those 2 resources and discard them. So they are no longer in our hand, and we have our first building in our city. Lucky us. But before our turn is finished, we have to replenish this. So since this was a resource, it becomes a building in its place. And since this was a building, it becomes a resource in its place. And as you can see, that's how things are going to happen. So yeah, at the beginning of the game, you might have a lot of buildings here, but as you take buildings, they will always be replaced with resources too. But yes, that's how that's going to work. Now, whenever you take a building, you are allowed to take 2 buildings if you can play them both into your city. Meaning, you'd have to be able to pay the resources for both buildings if there were 2 buildings here, for instance. Or should I say these 2 buildings, you would have to pay the resources for. So, for instance, but here's the thing. Let's say I wanted to play the ATM. I could play the ATM if I wanted to by using my ingenuity as the resource that I need, right? I could do that. Or I could take this resource and then this building here, for instance, and pay for it that way. But if I wanted to take 2 buildings, I'd have to make sure I'd be able to use the resources for both buildings. So for instance, let's just say I had enough resources to take everything. Let's just say I had these 2 cards here, for instance, for instance, or no, better yet, let me do it this way. Let's say I had this building. This building here gives me a permanent economy resource. So let's say I had this building in my city, okay? And I have this ingenuity and this ecology, and I could, for instance, pay for this with these 2 cards, right? Or, better yet, let's say I didn't have the ingenuity card. Let's say I had an industry, another industry, the ecology card here, and this building here, okay? And I wanted to take both of these on the same turn. Well, first of all, this one would only require, obviously, a economy, which I have here thanks to this permanent resource, and an ecology. So I could pay for that building and put it into my town. Cool, right? Now, let's say I wanted to play this building here. Well, I have the 2 industry for the building right here. I could do that. But you'll notice in order to pay for this economy, I'd have to use this permanent resource again. You are never allowed to use permanent resources a second time, as in you can't use them for the second card if you use them for the first card. And so since I used this permanent resource to pay for this building here, I can't use this exact card the rest of the turn to help pay for this. So then therefore I couldn't build this building, which means I wouldn't be able to take it, and so I'd have to take one of the other resource cards next to it. So when you build two towns, you have to make sure that if you're going to build two towns on the same turn, or two buildings on the same turn, that you're going to be able to afford both of them without using a resource or a permanent resource for both of them, obviously. But that's basically how you play the game. That's basically everything you would need to know in order to play the game, basically, right? And so that's kind of how things work. And then obviously, like I said, the points, we already talked about how you score points at the end of the game and all that jazz. Now, here was one thing about the solo mode I'll make sure to note now. So we talked about, obviously, that how you're going to score points, so we don't need to talk about that anymore because we explained that very well, and we already explained how the game would end and how you would count up victory points and all that jazz. But you'll notice these tokens. I said you always take the bottom card, so when this goes down here and this goes here for the AI opponent, there isn't a bottom card under here. So when that happens, it's going to take, the AI opponent's going to take this card, and it's going to take the top card of this same column when that happens, when there's not a bottom card to take. That's what's going to happen when that happens. And then whenever a token no longer can go down because there's no more rows down, it will always go all the way up to the top. And once a token can't go to the right anymore because there's no more columns over here, it's going to go all the way to the left. That's how that would work. That's how the AI opponent works. So basically, you should have everything here explained. That should be enough to explain the game fully. Obviously, once again, this is an engine building game, so you want to try to get as many permanent resources as you can to help you pay for cards for buildings in the future, obviously, because remember, this is engine building, so think of these permanent resources as your engine that you're building, just like you would in another engine building game, as you get resources and things like that. So that's basically everything you need to know in order to play Point City. I hope this explanation of how to play both, if you're going to play multiplayer and solo, is enough. I hope this works for you guys. If you guys liked this video, don't forget to leave me a like, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.